Morning. That is the first time I saw that small hand video, and I don't know what to think about it. Like, EJ is so passionate, but the hands are so awkward. I don't know how to process what I just saw. We have a saying here in our church that we take the mission serious, but not ourselves. And so if that seems like a team you would like to work with, I would encourage you to reach out. It's a great group of folks that have a lot of fun. This last weekend, actually just yesterday, me and my wife Emily, we started talking about how close the summer is, at least the summer break is, to coming to an end. She's only 2.5 weeks away from going back to the classroom. So we started talking about all the things that needed to happen between now and then, all the registrations that needed to be filled out, all the supplies that need to be purchased, basically all the money that needs to be spent, new clothes, new shoes, all those wonderful things that we get to do at the beginning of the school year. This year, I have a middle schooler. It's that time where they start caring about what they wear. I remember as a middle schooler and into high school, one of my favorite times of year was being able to pick out some new clothes. We all had our things, right? For me, it was a pair of white K-Swiss, maybe some lugs. You guys remember lugs? They were pretty awesome. I needed to have a jersey, at least one cool jersey. Hopefully it was Michael Jordan, but something else would probably do. And then my favorite T-shirt brand was this brand that came out in the 80s called No Fear. Their whole campaign, or their thought behind their shirt, was that there's nothing to be afraid of in this life. And they had all these clever sayings to remind you that there's nothing to be afraid of, except for them it was failure or defeat at sports. That was their deal. As we look at our world, though, that's not the message that we see that surrounds us. So if we were to turn on the news or listen to talk radio or read basically anything on social media, they would remind us of how chaotic the world around us is and how much there is to be afraid of. All of us at some point have to deal with fear in our life. And I'm not just talking about fright. Really, the thing that's truer for most of us is the ideas of worry and anxiety and how those weigh us down, how that becomes a burden for our life when we constantly dwell on the question of what if the worst thing happens. Today, we'll be talking about how to deal with fear, how to address our anxiety and worry. We're going to be in Psalms 46 as we continue our series through the Psalms. This specific psalm is broken up into 3 separate sections. Each section is punctuated with the term Selah. It's a phrase that has something to do, from the best of our understanding, with the musical arrangement of the psalm. But it's also a reminder for the readers to stop and to reflect on what has just been said. That before you move on to anything else, to process this information. We have a friend who's named one of their daughters Selah Grace. To them, it's a reminder to stop and reflect on the grace of God. When we read a psalm and it has the term Selah, that's what the author would ask us to do, to pause just for a moment and reflect on what's being said. This psalm does not describe a peaceful world. It actually describes one in chaos. But even in the midst of the chaos, the psalmist gives a way for us to have tranquility of heart, inner peace at all times. The Psalms are not just meant to be read, they're meant to be experienced. We have to remember that these were ancient hymnals, that they were actually songs to be experienced. As we would experience a song today, we wouldn't just try to take the meaning of the lyrics. We would let it impact our thoughts and our mind and our heart. And as we read today, I would ask you to do that, to experience this psalm, not just come to it to understand its lyrics. And we're going to start in verse 1. You could join me there in Psalms 46. God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. Selah. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, and the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Selah. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolation on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Selah. I recently read a story about a man named Sam. Sam had dealt with a significant amount of fear in his life. He was deathly afraid of spiders, arachnophobia. It impacted pretty much every area of his life. When he would walk into a room, he said, even if I saw a spider, even if it was across the room, I would begin to shake and tremble. Often I would vomit. Sometimes I even fainted. He went on to describe the effect that this constant fear had on him, that he was always nervous, that he was always thinking about the worst possible scenario. As a child, he missed out on camps. He was afraid to go outside. He had a hard time making friends because they would continue to make fun of him because he was so overcome by worry and fear. As he grew older, it would affect his jobs and his vocation, his career. It would affect his dating life. It seemed like it dominated most areas of his life. Sam said the thing is, if you're constantly looking for a spider, if you're always looking for the thing that you're afraid of, you're sure that you're going to find it. And I found it everywhere I went. If we do not deal with fear, it can dominate our lives. In today's psalm, we'll find that God can handle those things in our life that create fear, those things in our life that seem like total disaster to us. As we examine these three marked out sections, we'll find that we can have victory over our worry, over our anxiety, and over our fears. The first way that we deal with fear is we remember the power of God. Verse 1, the author of the psalm says, God is our refuge, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the very mountains tremble at its swelling. Selah. When our minds are focused on worry, anxiety, and fear, so often we begin to ask the question, what if? What if something happens in our life that changes everything? What if I fail at that presentation? What if I say the wrong thing, if I do the wrong thing? What if I lose my job? How then would I provide for my family? How would I pay the mortgage or the rent? What would happen to us if I no longer was able to provide? What if I fail as a parent? What if my kids don't turn out okay and it's all my fault? What if I don't marry the right person? Or what if the person I'm married to now, what if that relationship is destroyed? What if my health begins to fade? And these are just the big things. I mean, our minds can be overcome by the daily small worries and anxieties of life. This psalmist, he quickly turns to the worst case scenario. But he doesn't ask the question, what if? Instead, he answers the question, even if the worst thing that he can imagine would happen, even if the ground beneath his feet begins to shake, as he describes a natural disaster, even if this whole world that I know is destroyed and falls into the sea, that God is my refuge. This is the foundation of the entirety of this psalm. God is our foundation. Later, he would call him our fortress over 2 other times. A refuge is a place of safety that during troubles and trials that you flee to, that you find security in, a place of retreat. God is our refuge, but it also says that he is our strength. If a refuge is an external place that we go to in our times of need, then a strength is an internal ability to overcome, to endure. To say this is to say that God is both our protection during hard times as well as our strength to overcome them. He is our refuge and our strength, but it also says that he is our very present help. When we think of help, many times, we think of something or somebody that responds to our direction, that we are able to control, that it assists us in accomplishing the things that we hope to accomplish and completing our goals. However, in the Old Testament, whenever the authors talked about God as our help, and then later on in the New Testament, when the Holy Spirit is referred to our help, that's not what is meant. What's meant is that when we are incapable of doing something, that help is present. That when we are unable, that he is able. That when we can't, that he can. That's the heart of what it means to have God as our help. Several years ago, I was working at a church. We had spent a lot of time developing a team that would respond to health and safety concerns at the church. Inevitably, somebody in our fellowship had a medical condition that took place during a service. And so our team responds well. Our medical trained personnel step up and care for her needs and escort her to the foyer. We were waiting in the lobby for the paramedics, the ambulance to show up. And I was there with one of my friends who's an off-duty medic himself. And as the ambulance showed up and as the team started to gather their supplies and came into the building, he said, "This is my favorite part of my job, this moment right now where they're at." He said, because when somebody's having a medical crisis or they're in fear for their life, that they're often overcome with anxiety and fear, that they are unable to care for themselves. And as you walk through the door and you have everything that you need to care for them, you just see a peace overcome their face because they know that help has arrived, that even though they are unable to care for themselves, that somebody has showed up that is able and that will, that if they need an IV or medication, it will be provided for them. If they need transportation, that they will be picked up and they will be taken to a place for care and for safety. That's the imagery that we have, is God is our helper. That help has arrived. That somebody is here to care for us, that when we can't, that he can. God is our refuge and our strength. This word that he uses to say God is our refuge and our strength, it puts the emphasis on God rather than on our own faith. It's to say that our hope is not in the strength of our faith, but in the strength of where our faith lies. That's why Jesus, when he's describing faith in the kingdom of God, he says all you have to have is the faith of a mustard seed. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be a lot. It just has to be directed in the right place, that God is our strength, our refuge. That even if the ground beneath us were to shake, God never would. That when we are weak, that he's strong. That when the world seems like it's falling apart around us, that he's steadfast. Often when we worry, it's because our faith is misdirected. We're worried about a future that we can't control because we are putting our faith in our ability and our power versus putting our faith in his. So the first way that we deal with fear is we remember the power of God, that he is our refuge and our strength, that we do not need to rely on our own abilities. The second way we deal with fear in our life is we experience the power of God, we experience the presence of God. Now, I'm not saying that we just learn more about God. We don't hear about other people's experience with God, but we literally experience his presence in our own lives. In verse 4, it says, "There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, a holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, and the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress." Selah. We all have those friends, or we know those people whose very presence brings a vibrancy to wherever they go. They're the life of the party. That when they show up, that there is just a level of fun that starts happening. We all know those folks in our life. God's presence has an effect also. The effect that God's presence has with his people is it brings peace. It brings peace to a situation and to the very soul of his people. The author has just told us this idea that even if the world were to crumble under our feet, even if the worst were to happen, that God is our refuge. Now his imagery changes a little bit, and he starts imagining or describing a war. In the midst of this war, there's a city that's under siege. And in the middle of it, the inhabitants, even with a war existing around them, are safe and secure. They are able to be this way because the presence of God is there. With the presence of God, the author describes comes the provision of God, that he cares for them and their needs. He also describes the power of God and the protection of God. It's to say that during this chaotic world, when we feel like we're surrounded by enemies, when there's a raging war, that we can trust in the provision, the protection, and the power of God because he is near. He would remind us, or he would say, to fear not. To fear not because the presence of God is near. What a great reason not to fear, that God's presence is near. In the New Testament, we find that Jesus was sent to literally be the presence of God amongst us. Emmanuel, God with us. And that wherever he went, we would see chaotic things happening, and that he would bring order in the midst of that chaos, in the midst of that disorder. One of my favorite stories of when this happened is pretty well known. Jesus and his disciples have just spent several days in pretty intense ministry. They're all worn out. They all need a little bit of respite, a little bit of downtime. And so they get on a boat and they go out into a lake for some solitude. It sounds like that Jesus probably fell asleep pretty quickly, maybe immediately. And as he does sleep, the skies begin to darken. A storm begins to move in. The lake begins to have waves, that the waves grow larger and they start overcoming the sides of the boat. In that moment, we find the disciples, many of who were trained fishermen. They had spent years, their entire life, on these waters. They knew what a storm like this meant. They've seen its destructive ability. And they cry out to Jesus, "How can you be sleeping in a time such as this?" Jesus wakes up, and at first he seems slightly annoyed because the disciples had put their faith in the boat rather than in the Messiah that was within it. He rebukes the waves in that moment. And then two things happen. The first thing that happens is we see his authority over the created world, that he has the ability to speak and that the waves cease, that he calms them just with his words. But the next thing that we see is that he calms the fears, the very soul of his followers, as they find that his presence can bring peace to chaotic times. I've experienced this in my own life, the presence of God that can bring peace to the heart and the mind and the soul of me. For as long as I can remember in my adult life, I've struggled with anxiety. In 2015, it came to a peak. I was burdened by constant worry, physically afflicted by it. I started going months with sleeping only 2 or 3 hours a night. It began to wear on basically every part of my life. It affected my family, my ministry, my own happiness. I began to look for help. I spoke with physicians, asked other people who had experienced anxiety, what they've done. I read articles, and there was 2 things I figured out. First was that there was this physical thing that I need to deal with, that my anxiety wasn't just mental, but there was this physical attribute to it. That I began to realize the importance of living a healthier life, drinking less caffeine for me. Had to give up coffee. It was rough. Had to exercise more, have a healthier diet. All of those helped me control and curb my anxiety. But the thing that had the most significant impact, the greatest impact, was the presence of God in my life. That I found the importance and the value of that, of waking up in the morning and spending time with him. Not wake up in the morning just to check off a devotional and be like, got that done, made my devotional done, I'm good to move on. But to draw near to him, to spend extended times of prayer and worship and reflection on his goodness in my life, to hear what he would have to say to me and to say what I had and I needed to say to him. That I started taking a Sabbath, something that I had never done in my life, and I think it's a lost opportunity for many of us in the church today, what it means to rest in God for an entire day, every week. I began to meditate on his word daily, to journal about what God was doing in my life, to take opportunities to draw near to him on a daily basis. As I did that, I began to know the presence of God in my life and the peace that it would bring. I don't want to say that I don't have anxiety ever anymore, because that's just not the case. But whenever that arises, I know where to turn. I know where my refuge is. I know that his presence can bring peace to my life. That even when there's a chaos around me, even when it seems like my soul is roaring within me, that he is my refuge and my strength. If you have experienced or are experiencing anxiety and worry in your life, I would encourage you by saying we do not have a detached or removed God, that we have a very present God, that you could draw near to him, that he doesn't just calm our circumstances, but he gives us the strength and the ability, the power to overcome them. He could calm our very anxious hearts, that he is our refuge. Run to him. He sustains us in our very present need. So we find that in dealing with fear, first thing we would be encouraged to do is remember the power of God. The second thing is we experience the presence of God. And the third thing that the author here shares with us is he would tell us to remember the plans of God as we continue in verse 8. Behold, the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolation on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bows and he shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Selah. Worry is a heavy burden to carry, a burden that's focused on the future. We can spend so much time asking the question, what if? But as we read through the scriptures, we will find that God has a plan for this world, a plan of redemption and restoration. We have promises that those plans are also for you and for me. As we come to this part of this psalm, the author describes a warring world, actually a world that's at war with God. In Romans 15, Paul would tell us to not submit to God as to be his enemy, but to be reconciled to him through the death of his Son. That one day, God will take rule of this world around us. That day is coming. And so when he says this thing, be still and know that I am God, often we hear it and we think of having quiet time. I have known the value or importance of having time set apart for God in the morning. The Bible speaks often about stepping away from the chaotic world and seeking that time with him. However, now in this moment, that's not what the author intent is, what his intent is. What he's saying is in this world of chaos, in this place of war and strife, that he will be victorious and he will take the role of the Lord of this world at one day. And he will say, be still and know that I am God. And in that moment that every knee shall bow, that every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And so for those who have yet to submit to God, this is a warning of that thing that is to come. That they can be reconciled to God, but there's a day that there will not be that option anymore. For the believer, for those that have already been reconciled, that have already cast their trust in Jesus Christ, this gives us hope that God is sovereign, that he has power and authority, and it will one day bring peace, that there will be no more suffering, no more struggle, no more difficulty, that an end will come to all of that. It's a reminder to be still, because he will still the rage of the world around us. So what do we do with this as we move forward? Well, we look at our life, the things that we've been anxious about, the things that have brought worry and fear to us. And we no longer let those dominate us with the what if, but we remember that even if the worst thing does happen, that Jesus Christ is still Lord, that he's our refuge and our strength, that he's our fortress of solitude, that we could run to him in our times of need, that we could experience his power in our life, that we can know of his peace, and we know that he has a plan to redeem and restore all of the world around us. That's the hope that we have today. Let me close us in prayer. God, this world around us, it's a reminder of brokenness. It's a reminder of the sin that's brought war, that's brought broken relationships, that could dominate our mind with fear and with questions of the future. As we come here today, God, I just pray that you would calm our hearts and our mind and our soul, that we could put our trust in you, that you are our refuge and our strength, that you give us a place to run to, that you give us the ability to overcome, that you have a plan for us and for this world around us. Let us have peace today in your presence. Let your presence be known, be experienced in this place today and in our week as it comes. We pray these things in your Son's name, Jesus. Amen.